Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Nice to be here. So I'm told this is the last session of the day, and if I run over by an hour or so, it doesn't really matter too much. So stay buckled in. So thank you very much. Good to be here. Credentialing. So I better say just exactly what it is first of all. So I think we heard about a journey from Richard just now. So we're also on a journey that started some time ago, and it is around this issue of credentialing, which is basically rules being put in place that industry personnel have to adhere to before being allowed to cross the threshold of a hospital. And back in 2014, NHS, I would say very much at the prompting of industry, decided to take a look at this issue to see what was happening out in the environment and how that was potentially impacting on the relationship between the NHS and industry, which I think we both value very much and want to protect the openness between those two sectors. So 2014, Sir Bruce Keogh actually kicked this off. Obviously he's on his way to retirement now, but a good friend gone, I would say. Really to see how they can make it easier for industry and the NHS to work together, not harder, which is something that we found was happening with credentialing. It was providing a barrier. The reason that really they wanted to look at this was because I do believe there is a sweet spot there, and we've heard already this morning about the innovations that have come about when industry, clinicians, academics, the military, all come together and work together as organizations to really benefit patient care, system efficiency. So they're very cognizant of this, I would say, at the central level, at the higher echelons of the NHS. We do find it's a somewhat different story at the coalface, at the individual trust level, particularly where you're dealing with procurement, who have particular goals that they have been set and that they are trying to achieve. We've got to make sure that that we can deliver something that meets the higher aspirational goals of working together, collaboration, but also supports local NHS trusts. So we set out a few principles that really wanted to look at when we were carrying out the review. First of all, you had to recognize the situation that we were in at that point, and we continue to be today, where there are a number of commercial providers in the market and things are being done at a local level. And so a very fragmented approach. It was felt that really we need to move to a national single system. How do we best do that? But there was a couple of things that were clear in that. Cost. We know cost within the NHS is an issue, so there shouldn't be any additional cost or bureaucracy involved in this, both on industry side and NHS side. But also, it needs to be aligned to the NHS needs, but it needs to be aligned to industry needs as well. It needs to be proportional to the risk or potential risk that's involved here. So they're kind of some of the key principles. So from an NHS England point of view, they really, their key aim was about joint work and the collaboration. How can they maximize that? They felt to do that, it was about a set of national systems and national standards. But they weren't going to do it, quite frankly. It's down to industry to do that. And I think that's something, certainly from a trade association point of view, but I think our members as well, absolutely accepted. It is industry's responsibility to put people into the field that know what they are doing, that they are well trained, know how to behave, know the protocols and etiquette, know the environment they're working in, know their products, know the clinical application. That is our duty. So very much, we welcome that the industry could take a lead on this, but working in conjunction with NHS England. So that was 2014. I kind of moved through 18 months or so. Fast forward a bit. Where we are is having gone through a number of stakeholder engagements, a lot of to and fro with the NHS on various levels, as well as bringing together a very broad coalition of industry, and very pleased that Medilink is part of that. We are now developing a national registry for the life sciences industry, for people who have regular interactions with the front door of the NHS. And that is very much something that industry is doing, and it is, I say, a broad coalition, not just of medical technology, but also the pharmaceutical industry as well. And I think a key part of this, and a key part of reassuring the NHS that this is the right thing that's being done, is how we go about presenting that. And we've decided that we want this to be an accredited register, and that's working through a body called Professional Standards Authority, which has the mandate to do such accreditations. Now, I'm no expert on accredited registers, and quite frankly, within our wider cohort of trade associations, Medilinks, BIVDA, ABPI, etc., this wasn't our expertise. So what we decided is we need to bring in the expertise. And what I can do now is hand over to my colleague Janet, who is that expertise from the Academy of Healthcare Science. So I'll be back shortly, but some words of wisdom from Janet first.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and to be described as an expert is fantastic. I'm a registrar for the Academy for Healthcare Science, and I'm also the chief executive. And what that means is that we set up an accredited register and gained accreditation from the Professional Standards Authority. It was no mean feat, and that took us about 3 years to get to this point. So what is the Professional Standards Authority? Some of you in here may already be members of registers of different types. So for example, the General Medical Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the Health and Care Professions Council are all accredited by the Professional Standards Authority. We came about as a result of the Health Education England and other 4 countries coming together to decide they wanted to commission an academy to deal particularly with healthcare science. What we were aware of is that field expanded and has been expanding. So a little bit about the Professional Standards Authority is that it has a lot of thought documents that are useful to look into and to look at appropriate levels of regulation and registration. I've included a number of documents that are there on the website, and their website is really interesting to look at. So what does PSA accreditation mean? It means that there are certain sets of standards, rules, and obligations that you sign up to and that you are monitored against and that you're looked into and that you have to be able to demonstrate on a very regular basis to make sure that you continue with your compliance. So it's actually seen as an organisation of repute by all of the key stakeholders within the UK. The slides that you've got and are seeing today, once we've checked with PSA, because that's the other thing, we have to make sure that any slides that we give out have been vetted by them, because we're mentioning their name and their standards. We'd be happy to circulate them. You get a sort of kite mark, a brand, and as a registrant on one of these registers, and what we're looking at is those companies that are working on this project would be able to use that particular branding on their stationery and literature, which is really important because it says that you're complying as an individual registrant with those standards that have been established. So what really? And a lot of people have said, so what does that mean? It means that when you engage with patients and staff within the NHS, that actually you're able to have a dialogue with them on a like-for-like basis, that actually you're on a register, you'll be able to demonstrate that you're on a register. And the way that we're looking at trying to pull that together means that you'll also have a badge that will be able to help you be able to take them directly to your particular profile on that register. But it shows that you're believing in an ethical way of operating, and I think what's been fascinating is that the groups that I've been working with have been an absolute pleasure in terms of looking at standards and being really up for the challenge that working through the PSA requirements has given. And we're talking about this being a credentialing register. In actual fact, this is the first credentialing register that PSA will have accredited, we hope. Obviously, in terms of where we're at with it, the application's in, and we will be working through all of the documents that have been put in with PSA. But it's really exciting. It's exciting from their perspective, and clearly they have a significant degree of influence within the NHS. I mean, how many doctors do you know that work in the NHS that are not able to, that can do that without being on a professional register? So the principles that you can see, that they're actually transparent, they're ongoing. So it's not a tick box at a point in time. It's a continuous thing. It's a single accessible solution. So the point about a register is that it's front-facing. The public and the NHS people that you work with will be able to do that, look at it, look at the profiles of individuals, in the same way that if you were to pull up the GMC register or the NMC register, you can see practitioners there. It's got independent oversight. The organisation I work for is a not-for-profit organisation. The PSA, the Professional Standards Authority, is an independent organisation, and it's overseen by government. The sort of regulation we're talking about is proportionate and cost-effective. And it's been, this particular piece of work has also had NHS England engagement in the work. So we're always going to be aiming to make sure that it's easy to apply and easy to use. Just to give you some idea, the sorts of rules and regulations that each of the registers have, this is the one for the Academy for Healthcare Science. The one in blue is actually something called Good Scientific Practice, but those are specific standards for scientists. The work with the life science industry for the credentialing register includes these three areas. And at the end of this presentation, Andrew will give you an indication of a website, which very shortly will have those documents for you to be able to access. And what's been happening? We've had the steering group, and we joined in June last year, after the work had been going on for a little time, but where the register needed to be developed. We've currently got to a situation where we're finalising the governance arrangements, and you'll have seen on the introductory slide that Andrew here is the shadow chair for the Registration Council. And we've also got an education and training advisory group. So things have really progressed. And we have some colleagues in the audience who are also part of the steering group. What we're looking at now is how we move that forward. So there'll be things about how we implement that register, and working through that as a particular piece of work as a joint group. We're currently finalising the arrangements for the IT and the GS1 barcoding, so that we're looking at the relationship that we can have with that organisation in helping to introduce this across the NHS. So the Professional Standards Authority have received the completed documentation, and with regard to the timeline that we agreed with the steering group, I'm pleased to say that we've met all of the timelines that we agreed to do. And the next part is waiting for the Professional Standards Authority to come back to us with either some learning points, which are always useful, any developments that we need to include, and for them to actually visit and look at how some of the processes will be operating. So basically, that's actually speeding ahead. If you think about the length of time it normally takes to develop a register. The steering group has actually really taken the bull by the horns and really driven it forward. We've had a series of workshops, and they've not been massive workshops, but with the steering group, looking at the register standards, the register rules, education and training, quality assurance, governance, the IT development, which is really significant, and what the consultation planning and delivery is going to be about. And that's an ongoing piece of work. So if I can hand back over to Andrew, he'll take you through some of the educational elements.
Thank you, Janet. I think this bit is one of the bits that get asked more about. So, to be honest, the top-level standards, they're very much aligned with trade association codes of conduct and that sort of thing, and they're things you would expect anyone to do and ways to behave. Just don't do anything bad, sort of thing. What a lot of people ask about is, okay, what are the exact criteria? Because at the moment, when you go to a hospital, hospital A, you can be asked for 5 different inoculations. You go to hospital B, they might ask for a different 6. It's very scattergunned, and it's not aligned to what the NHS actually has to provide. It can be actually over and above the standards for NHS staff, and it's, I say, very variable. So we think it's very key that there is one set of criteria across the nation, or nations, should I say. But also, the life science industry incorporates a lot of different roles, and people doing a lot of different things. So we don't think one set of criteria can fit every different type of role. Someone who is going into an operating theatre, supporting an orthopedic intervention, is doing something quite different to someone who's going in doing catalogue sales in a procurement office. We're talking about proportionate criteria here to mitigate potential risks. So we are looking at tiered criteria. So basically, tier 1 is where you're going into an office type environment. Tier 3 is where you're going into a theatre critical care type environment. Tier 2 is basically anything in between those two. What does that mean in practice? So it's really defined by sort of 3 different things. There's one, your criminal record, so DBS checks, when are those required? Health and safety criteria in terms of inoculations, and then training requirements. So basically, your DBS is where you would be going into some sort of clinical environment. Your inoculations, basically what we're saying is there's a number of recommended inoculations, but it only becomes mandatory to have your Hep B if you're going into that theatre environment. And again, this is very much aligned to the NHS. While they absolutely encourage their staff to have the flu jab, it's not actually a mandate. So we are definitely aligning with that sort of approach. The training basically gets more stringent as you go up the tiers. Some basic training about what is the NHS, what are the key do's and don'ts in terms of data protection, these sorts of things go across the board. Then as you move into the clinical area, more things about infection control and more specifics around how to operate in that theatre environment, etc. So very much trying to ensure that it is tiered and taking into account the different roles that people may be undertaking. So after we developed all these standards, we went out to consultation to industry. So certainly all the trade associations, I know Darren and Medilink's included, sent out the consultation. I hope some of you here took part and basically asked, what do you think? A number of things came back from that. The key ones here are listed. So definitely concerns about, well, is this another layer of bureaucracy? Is this another system? So already people are finding they have to sign up to different systems. Certainly the proposal here is there is one place where you need to register, where you need to put your details in. To be clear, this is about credentialing. It's not about making appointments to go into the hospital. It's not about being signed into that hospital environment. Those are still things that could happen at a local level. But our intent is that the details on here are the master details, and any sort of other electronic systems that are in the hospital can pull the details from this. So our aim is actually to cut down on bureaucracy, have standardization of criteria, etc., and to make everything much more easy, both for industry and the NHS. Enforcement was a question of how do you enforce it? It's a good question, and there's been discussions about do trade associations put in their codes of conduct that people must be signed up? Can we somehow mandate to industry? Quite frankly, no, we can't. However, in practice, if the NHS adopt this and say if you're not on the register, you're not coming in, that enforces the system. The next question is, how do you enforce people are meeting the criteria within it and the behaviours, etc. You may have seen that Janet put up something about the appeals process and that sort of thing. So there is a complaints process that will be run within the register. So if someone is not adhering to the standards that are expected and required, there is a complaints process that can be lodged. And the ultimate sanction is you could be taken off the register. And if the NHS has that as a requirement of entry, you wouldn't be able to enter their premises. So that's basically the ultimate sanction there. But there is that complaints process, and I think this is something that makes it much more robust than any of the the local implementations of such schemes. I think everyone was very keen that there is one system for this. This was a consultation with industry, so you would probably kind of expect that. But we've also been talking to the NHS about this, and we went to a national meeting for the clinical procurement networks. The specialist, typically specialist nurses dealing with clinical procurement. They equally were very keen on having one system, which was, I must admit, very reassuring to hear from them. So we're definitely on the right lines with this. So we asked lots of questions. I just picked out a snapshot. Basically, did people agree that the standards were right? And basically, 90-10, yes, they are right. They are proportionate for what we're trying to achieve. So next steps. I think Janet's been through some of these. So we have submitted to PSA, and all our fingers are currently crossed. It will take some time for them to work through their processes for approving this, but we're really looking at middle of the year to have something in place. I think really one of the important things here is transition. So at a rough estimate, and no one actually knows the precise number, we're probably looking at 25,000 people who might need to be on this register. That's a lot of people. And we're also looking at, again, pick a number, 250 in round numbers, NHS trusts that might want, or hospitals, establishments that might want to implement this system. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So very clear that we need to have a transition phase where both the industry and the NHS get up to speed on this. So talked about a journey sort of right at the start, starting in 2014. I think we're still on stage one of that journey, which will probably end towards the end of this year. But actually, I think we're on a much longer journey that talks a lot about the professionalism of the industry generally, but the professionalism of the roles that we put into the hospitals as well, and how a credentialing register can really put our industry on a similar footing to others in that health system. So I think we've got probably decades in front of us of a journey here. The operating department practitioners, it took them 10 years to get their sort of professional standing. We're very much at the infancy here, but we're moving along that same journey. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I think, that's the last slide that Janet referred to, where the website address is up there if you want to take a quick photo or quickly scribble it down. Thank you very much.